Have you ever stopped to think that the life you're living may not be entirely your own? That the thoughts you have, the decisions you make, and the desires you feel might not have come from your true self? What if there is a hidden force within you, deep, dark, and silent, that has been guiding your actions since day one? Without you even realizing it, you may be wondering, what is this force, and how can it affect me? Well, the answer lies in the mind, the depths of the unconscious. And at the very heart of this realm, Carl Jung, one of the greatest minds in the world of psychology, discovered something groundbreaking. He gave us the concept of the shadow, that part of ourselves we've been hiding, repressing, or refusing to acknowledge. We all have a shadow. It's the hidden part of our psyche that contains everything we don't want to see or admit about ourselves. The desires we think are shameful, the fears we can't face, and the imperfections we try to ignore. But what if I told you that these very aspects of our being, the things we want to avoid, are the key to unlocking a whole new version of ourselves? What if the things you've been running from are actually the things that will set you free? In this video, we are going to take a deep dive into the world of Carl Jung and his theory of individuation, a journey of self-discovery that requires us to confront the shadow and face the darkness within. It's not an easy path, but it's one that promises transformation, freedom, and authenticity. Before we start, I want to encourage you to like, share, and subscribe if you find this content valuable. And if you're feeling particularly generous, donate through the super thanks to support the channel and help me continue creating content that dives deep into these transformative ideas. Your support means the world to me and makes all the difference. So let's begin. Are you ready to confront the parts of yourself you've been avoiding for years? Let's take this journey together, and you'll soon realize that in the darkness, there is immense power waiting to be unlocked. Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century. Do I truly know who I am? Are the thoughts I have, the decisions I make, and the desires that I feel truly mine, or are they the product of something deeper, something I'm not aware of? Jung's exploration of the human psyche offers profound answers to these questions, answers that challenge us to confront aspects of ourselves we often shy away from. These insights, however, are not easily accepted, for they demand a certain vulnerability, the willingness to face the dark side of our personality. Jung's approach to psychology diverged sharply from that of his predecessor, Sigmund Freud, who believed that much of human behavior could be understood through the lens of repressed sexual desires. Jung, however, saw the psyche as much more complex. He did not merely focus on treating mental illness or aligning individuals to societal norms, but sought to understand the deeper layers of mind, those hidden forces that shape us unconsciously. One of his most significant contributions was his concept of the collective unconscious, a universal layer of the human mind shared by all humanity. This collective unconscious contains archetypes, primordial symbols, and patterns that have existed for centuries, long before our personal experiences, and which continue to influence us without our awareness. Imagine for a moment that you are standing in front of a mirror, staring at your reflection. You might think that you know exactly who you are, your likes, dislikes, your identity, and your life story. However, as Jung suggested, the reflection in the mirror is often incomplete. What you see in that mirror is merely the persona, the outward expression of who you believe yourself to be. But beneath that surface lies the shadow, a part of your psyche that is repressed, often hidden from your conscious awareness. Jung's revolutionary idea was that the true understanding of the self only begins when we confront this shadow, when we look beyond the persona and acknowledge the aspects of ourselves that we prefer to ignore. This confrontation with the shadow is not merely an intellectual exercise. It is a psychological battle that many of us will avoid throughout our lives, often at great personal cost. For Jung, the shadow represents the unconscious part of ourselves that we choose to deny, the undesirable traits, memories, and emotions that we deem unacceptable. These can include everything from feelings of anger, greed, or jealousy, to more profound emotions like shame or guilt. In modern life, we tend to push these uncomfortable feelings aside, labeling them as negative and therefore not worthy of attention. Yet, as Jung argued, this very repression of the shadow is what leads to psychological fragmentation and ultimately suffering. Consider the story of someone who appears successful on the outside. Perhaps they have a career, a family, and a seemingly perfect life. Yet, they struggle with recurring feelings of inadequacy, guilt, or anxiety. They can't quite pinpoint the source of these emotions, and they often dismiss them as bad luck or fate. What they are experiencing is the manifestation of their shadow, those parts of themselves that they refuse to confront. Jung would argue that this individual is not merely unlucky, but rather trapped in unconscious patterns that they have not taken the time to examine. Jung's ideas challenge the conventional belief that we are simply the sum of our conscious thoughts and actions. His theory proposes that much of what shapes us is hidden beneath the surface. In the unconscious mind, this includes not only personal memories and experiences, but also the deep, archetypal patterns that have been passed down through generations. These archetypes, according to Jung, influence everything from the relationships we form to the roles we play in society. They are not simply cultural inventions. They are part of the very structure of the human soul. To understand Jung's work, one must first grasp the concept of the collective unconscious. Unlike the personal unconscious, which holds memories and experiences unique to the individual, the collective unconscious contains shared memories, symbols, and patterns that transcend personal history. These archetypes, universal forms embedded in our psyche, guide our thoughts, actions, and emotions in ways we often fail to recognize. For example, the archetype of the hero embodies the drive to overcome challenges and achieve greatness, while the shadow represents the rejected and repressed aspects of the self. These archetypes influence not only how we see ourselves, but also how we relate to others and the world around us. One of the most intriguing aspects of Jung's work is the idea that these archetypes do not just exist in a theoretical sense, but that they actively shape our lives. For instance, have you ever noticed how certain people seem to play out the same patterns in their relationships or careers, even when they try to break free? This is the influence of archetypes in action. An individual might repeatedly find themselves in toxic relationships because they're unconsciously drawn to the archetype of the victim, perpetuating a pattern of self-sabotage that they cannot break free from. Similarly, consider the example of a person who continually seeks validation from others. Jung would argue that this person is likely dominated by the archetype of the wounded child, constantly seeking approval in an attempt to heal old emotional wounds. These archetypal patterns are not only present in individual lives, but are reflected in the myths, stories, and legends of different cultures. The hero's journey, for instance, is a story that appears across cultures and time periods, symbolizing the path of self-discovery and transformation. These stories are not just cultural artifacts. They are reflections of the deep, archetypal structure of the human psyche. However, understanding the collective unconscious and the archetypes is not enough. As Jung emphasized, the key to true self-realization lies in confronting and integrating the shadow. This process of integration, known as individuation, is central to Jung's psychology. Individuation is the journey of becoming whole, of reconciling the different parts of ourselves and accepting both the light and dark aspects of our nature. It is not an easy process, and it requires courage to face the parts of ourselves that we have spent years repressing. But it is through this confrontation that we can achieve true self-awareness and freedom. The path to individuation is not without its challenges. It demands that we stop living in denial and start taking responsibility for our own lives. It calls on us to stop blaming others and start facing the painful truths about ourselves. Jung believed that this process often happens during periods of crisis, when we're forced to confront the aspects of our psyche that we have neglected. It is in these moments of crisis, whether they come in the form of a broken relationship, a career setback, or a personal loss, that we are given the opportunity to grow and transform. At the heart of Jung's work lies the belief that we must be willing to face the darkness within us in order to achieve wholeness. This is not a process of self-destruction, but rather one of self-creation. It is through the integration of a shadow that we can unlock the full potential of our psyche and begin to live in alignment with our true selves. But this requires us to go beyond the surface level of our existence, to look deeper into the unconscious forces that shape our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. In conclusion, Carl Jung's exploration of the human mind offers a powerful framework for understanding our inner lives. By recognizing the influence of the collective unconscious and the archetypes, and by confronting the shadow, we can begin the process of individuation, of becoming whole. It is not an easy path, but is the only true path to freedom. The more we understand the hidden forces within us, the more we can transform our lives and become the people we were always meant to be. Jung's message is not just a call to understand ourselves, but a call to embrace the full spectrum of our being, the light and the dark, the conscious and the unconscious, the known and the unknown. Only then can we truly be free. Carl Jung, a towering figure in the field of psychology, reshaped how we understand the human mind, while Sigmund Freud laid the groundwork for modern psychoanalysis. It was Jung who ventured into uncharted territories, revealing insights that not only challenged Freud's theories, but also delved deeper into the subconscious mind. Where Freud focused on sexual repression and the formative years of childhood as the foundation for human behavior, Jung saw the human psyche as a far more complex and dynamic entity, one shaped by both personal experiences and ancient, collective patterns of human existence. Jung's career was defined by his fascination with the depths of the human mind, while Freud's work focused primarily on the individual's relationship with sexuality and the unconscious. Jung believed that the unconscious mind was not merely a collection of repressed thoughts and desires, but a rich, multi-layered reality that included influences from the past, from our ancestral heritage, and from the collective human experience. He famously split from Freud in the early 1900s. As he grew increasingly disillusioned with Freud's emphasis on sexuality as the central driving force in human behavior, Jung argued that there were broader forces at play, forces that spanned beyond the personal and into the universal forces embedded in the collective unconscious that shape our behavior without us even being aware of them. Jung's pioneering work in this area was not just about developing new theories. It was about exploring the hidden recesses of the human psyche, the parts of ourselves we cannot easily access or acknowledge. His most groundbreaking contributions include his concepts of the collective unconscious and archetypes, both of which illuminate the dark, mysterious depths of the unconscious mind. But perhaps the most impactful of his discoveries was the concept of the shadow, the part of ourselves that we repress and deny. Jung's understanding of the human psyche was not based on the idea that we are simply the sum of our conscious thoughts and behaviors. Instead, he proposed that the human mind is a complex interplay of conscious awareness and unconscious forces. These unconscious forces, according to Jung, are not random or purely personal. They are shaped by universal archetypes, shared patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior that have been passed down through generations. These archetypes are embedded in the collective unconscious, a layer of the psyche that connects all human beings, regardless of time or place. It is through this collective unconscious that humans across different cultures and epochs have produced similar myths, symbols, and stories that speak to universal themes of transformation, struggle, and growth. The shadow is perhaps the most profound and complex of these unconscious forces. Jung described the shadow as the part of the psyche that consists of all the aspects of the self that are repressed or denied. These are the parts of our personalities, behaviors, and desires that we deem unacceptable, undesirable, or evil. Jung's radical insight was that the shadow is not inherently bad or harmful, but simply the parts of us that we choose to ignore or reject. The shadow is the unacknowledged, hidden part of the self that we often keep buried deep within our unconscious mind. It includes everything we don't like about ourselves: the selfishness, the greed, the anger, the jealousy, the weaknesses, the desires for power, and so on. And while we may try to repress these aspects, Jung argued that they do not go away. Instead, they fester in the unconscious, influencing our thoughts, behaviors, and emotions in ways we are often unaware of. Jung's insight was not that we should get rid of the shadow or strive to become perfect human beings by eradicating these dark aspects. Rather, he believed that the key to psychological growth and self-realization lay in facing the shadow head-on, accepting it as a part of who we are and integrating it into our conscious awareness. For Jung, the process of individuation, the journey toward becoming a whole, authentic individual, could not begin until we acknowledged the shadow and made peace with it. To deny the shadow, to refuse to confront it, was to remain incomplete. The shadow contains the raw material for personal transformation. It holds the potential for power, creativity, and growth, but only if we are willing to confront it directly. To understand the shadow, let's look at a more relatable example. Consider a person who appears to have everything: a successful career, a loving family, a comfortable lifestyle. On the surface, their life seems perfect, but beneath the surface, they feel a persistent sense of emptiness, a sense that something is missing. Despite all their accomplishments, there is a nagging feeling that they are not truly satisfied. This is a common experience for those who have not yet faced their shadow. They may be unaware of it, but something inside them is seeking attention, perhaps their repressed desires, their unacknowledged fears, or their need for self-validation. Because they haven't confronted the parts of themselves that are not perfect or socially acceptable, these parts continue to exert influence on their lives, manifesting as feelings of dissatisfaction, anxiety, or depression. Jung would say that this person's dissatisfaction is not the result of external circumstances, but rather a consequence of their failure to integrate their shadow. The shadow, according to Jung, does not simply disappear if we ignore it. It will show up in subtle ways, often at times when we least expect it. For example, the person who feels perpetually dissatisfied might begin to lash out in anger at others, often over trivial matters. They might feel jealous of someone else's success or react with irrational defensiveness when criticized. These behaviors are expressions of the shadow parts of the self that are being projected onto others. Jung argued that the more we refuse to acknowledge these shadow aspects of ourselves, the more power they have over us. They control us from the depths of the unconscious, shaping our behavior and emotions in ways we do not fully understand. One of the most striking things about Jung's conception of the shadow is its universality. Everyone has a shadow, regardless of how good or moral they appear on the outside. In fact, the more someone identifies as a good person, the more likely they are to be unaware of the shadow lurking beneath the surface. This is because those who see themselves as morally upright or virtuous often fail to acknowledge the darker aspects of their psyche, believing that these traits belong only to bad people. As a result, they project their shadow onto others, seeing flaws and evils in others that they refuse to acknowledge in themselves. Take, for example, the individual who prides themselves on their honesty and integrity. They might look down on others who they perceive as dishonest or manipulative. However, if they take a closer look at their own actions, they might begin to see that they too have moments of dishonesty. Perhaps they lie to avoid conflict or manipulate situations to their advantage. These small, seemingly insignificant acts are part of the shadow, and they can only be addressed when the individual is willing to confront the uncomfortable truth about their own behavior. This is where Jung's idea of integration comes into play. Integration does not mean eradicating the shadow, but rather acknowledging it and learning to work with it. By bringing the shadow into conscious awareness, we can begin to understand the parts of ourselves that we have rejected. We can learn to use the energy of the shadow for positive change, transforming negative traits into sources of strength, creativity, and resilience. To put this into perspective, consider the artist who is grappling with feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt. This person may feel that they are not talented enough, that their work is not good enough. These feelings, however, are often projections of their shadow, the part of them that fears rejection or failure. Instead of ignoring these feelings or allowing them to control their behavior, the artist can choose to confront them, understanding that these emotions are part of their psyche that need to be integrated. By doing so, they can unlock their true creative potential, using the shadow as a source of inspiration rather than a source of fear. Ultimately, Jung's work on the shadow is a call for self-awareness and personal growth. It is an invitation to face the parts of ourselves that we fear, to acknowledge the aspects of our personality that we have suppressed or denied, and to use that awareness to create a more authentic, fulfilling life. Only by confronting the shadow can we achieve the self-realization that Jung believed was essential for true freedom. Carl Jung's exploration of the human psyche took us beyond the boundaries of Freud's psychoanalysis, delving into the deeper layers of the unconscious that influence our behavior, thoughts, and emotions in ways that are often imperceptible to us. Two of the most essential concepts Jung introduced were the collective unconscious and archetypes, both of which have profoundly shaped our understanding of the human mind. These concepts explain how certain universal patterns exist in the psyche of every individual, and how they influence not only our personal lives, but also our cultural narratives, myths, and even religions. The collective unconscious is one of Jung's most radical ideas, and it fundamentally changed how we understand the unconscious mind. Unlike Freud, who focused on personal experiences and repressed memories, Jung proposed that beneath our individual unconscious minds lies a deeper, shared layer of the unconscious that all humans inherit. This collective unconscious is not shaped by personal experiences or memories, but instead by universal themes and symbols that have existed throughout human history. It is a psychological inheritance, a reservoir of shared human experience that is passed down from generation to generation. This layer of the psyche contains images, symbols, and patterns that are common to all humans, regardless of time, culture, or place. These patterns are not learned or created in one's lifetime, but rather, they are instinctive and inherent in all of us. Jung's idea of the collective unconscious challenges the idea that our experiences are entirely individual. He believed that every human being carries a part of this universal unconscious, and it influences how we think, feel, and behave. The collective unconscious is not something we consciously know or are aware of, but it shapes our reactions to the world and our understanding of ourselves. Jung argued that the collective unconscious contains the deep psychic structures known as archetypes that govern our thoughts and behaviors. These archetypes are not merely abstract concepts. They are actual, living symbols that inhabit our minds and shape the course of our lives. Archetypes are universal patterns of behavior and thought that are found in the collective unconscious. They are symbolic representations of fundamental human experiences, such as birth, death, love, and struggle. These archetypes manifest in our dreams, myths, and even our daily lives, and they serve as templates that influence how we interpret the world and our place within it. For example, the hero archetype represents the part of us that seeks to overcome adversity, to transform and grow through trials and challenges. The shadow archetype, on the other hand, represents the aspects of ourselves that we repress or deny, the parts of us that we are ashamed of or refuse to accept. The hero archetype is particularly significant in understanding how we approach life's challenges. When we encounter difficulties, we often unconsciously draw on the hero archetype, seeing ourselves as the protagonist of a larger narrative in which we must face obstacles, defeat enemies, and ultimately triumph. This archetype is commonly seen in the stories of myth and legend. Think of King Arthur, Hercules, or the modern superhero. These figures embody the archetype of the hero, embarking on dangerous journeys and overcoming significant challenges to achieve greatness. But the hero archetype is not just found in legends. It is deeply embedded in the personal psyche, shaping how we confront challenges in our own lives. We may not fight dragons or save kingdoms, but we each have our own battles to face, whether in relationships, careers, or personal growth. However, the hero archetype is not always a force for good. While it can inspire courage and resilience, it can also become destructive when it is not properly integrated. For example, an individual who identifies too strongly with the hero archetype may become obsessed with rescuing others or solving their problems, even to their own detriment. This is seen in individuals who consistently put the needs of others ahead of their own, or who take on the burdens of others in an attempt to prove their worth. The hero can become a martyr, sacrificing themselves in pursuit of an idealized image of heroism, and this often leads to self-destruction. Such individuals may feel empty, unfulfilled, or resentful, despite their outward acts of kindness or courage. One example of this dynamic can be seen in relationships where one partner constantly seeks to save the other. A person who embodies the hero archetype might be drawn to individuals who need help, whether emotionally, financially, or psychologically. They may feel compelled to fix the other person, believing that doing so will provide them with a sense of purpose or self-worth. However, this dynamic often leads to an unhealthy relationship as the rescued partner becomes dependent, while the hero feels unappreciated and drained. Over time, this pattern can lead to resentment and frustration, as the hero feels as though they are giving too much without receiving anything in return. The shadow side of the hero archetype, the part of the psyche that has not been integrated, manifests in these destructive patterns, where the desire to help others becomes a form of self-sabotage. Another important archetype is the anima and animus, which represents the feminine and masculine aspects within each person. Jung believed that every individual, regardless of gender, has both masculine and feminine qualities within them. The anima represents the feminine side of a man's unconscious mind, while the animus represents the masculine side of a woman's unconscious mind. These archetypes play a significant role in how we relate to the opposite sex, and they influence our relationships, sexual dynamics, and even our internal self-concept. For instance, a man who has not integrated his anima may struggle with understanding or relating to women. He may project his unconscious feminine qualities onto women, seeing them as idealized or mystical figures. Or he may feel threatened by them, unable to accept the parts of himself that are feminine. Similarly, a woman who has not integrated her animus may find it difficult to connect with men, either rejecting their masculinity or trying to suppress her own masculine qualities, such as assertiveness or independence. These dynamics can create tension in relationships, as individuals project their unacknowledged inner selves onto others. Archetypes also manifest in the form of the wise old man or sage archetype, which represents the wisdom, knowledge, and insight that comes with age or experience. This archetype embodies the qualities of inner knowing, spiritual understanding, and the ability to provide guidance in times of uncertainty. We see this archetype in figures like Gandalf from The Lord of the Rings or Yoda from Star Wars. The wise old man represents the wisdom that resides within all of us, but which often remains dormant until we are ready to embrace it. The integration of this archetype requires an openness to learning, reflection, and accepting the role of the teacher in our lives. The self is the most profound archetype in Jungian psychology, representing the integrated whole of the psyche. The self encompasses all the other archetypes and embodies the true, authentic nature of an individual. It is the ideal state of being in which the conscious and unconscious minds are reconciled and all the fragmented aspects of the psyche are united. The journey toward achieving the self, Jung believed, was the ultimate goal of personal development. It is through the process of individuation, confronting the shadow, integrating the archetypes, and embracing all aspects of ourselves that we can achieve true wholeness. One of the most compelling aspects of Jung's work is the way these archetypes are not just abstract concepts, but living forces within us that shape our behavior, emotions, and choices. They are not mere symbols to be studied in books or observed from a distance. They are part of our psychological DNA, embedded in the very fabric of our existence. These archetypes influence how we see ourselves, how we interact with others, and how we navigate the world. They are not just the stuff of myths or fairy tales, they're the building blocks of our reality, guiding us on a subconscious level. Jung's ideas about archetypes and the collective unconscious provide us with a powerful tool for self-understanding. By recognizing the archetypal patterns in our own lives, we can begin to understand the forces that shape our behavior and, ultimately, take greater control over our destiny. We can choose to break free from destructive patterns and begin to live more authentically in alignment with the true self. Through this process of self-awareness and integration, we can unlock the full potential of the human psyche, embracing not only our light, but also our shadow, and ultimately becoming whole. The concept of the shadow in Carl Jung's psychology is one of the most transformative and often overlooked aspects of self-awareness. The shadow represents the dark, repressed, and often hidden parts of ourselves, those traits, behaviors, or emotions we prefer to deny, avoid, or disown. It consists of everything we find unacceptable or shameful in our character, including our weaknesses, desires, insecurities, and imperfections. The shadow is the part of ourselves that we hide, often because society, our upbringing, or even our own self-image tells us that it is not acceptable. Jung argued that this repression only leads to problems later on, as the shadow doesn't simply vanish. Instead, it becomes stronger, more influential, and begins to govern our behavior in unconscious ways. Understanding the shadow and learning to confront it is one of the most important and difficult tasks in the pursuit of personal growth and self-liberation. At the core of Jung's theory is the idea that the shadow is not inherently evil or something to be eliminated. It is rather a natural part of every human being. The shadow includes those traits of our personality that we find uncomfortable, undesirable, or downright frightening, such as envy, greed, pride, and anger, as well as more subtle feelings like self-doubt, fear of failure, and rejection. The problem arises when we fail to recognize these traits within ourselves, when we deny or suppress them in an attempt to appear more acceptable in the eyes of others or even ourselves. But this act of repression is not a neutral act. It has consequences. According to Jung, the more we refuse to confront the shadow, the more it grows in power, unconsciously controlling our lives in ways that lead to dysfunctional behaviors and unwanted outcomes. For example, consider the case of someone who prides themselves on being an extremely good person, someone who always does what's right, who is generous, selfless, and kind. This person may be seen as a role model by others, someone who has it all together. But despite their outward perfection, this individual may harbor feelings of resentment or selfishness that they refuse to acknowledge. Perhaps they believe they must always put others before themselves, or they're afraid of ever appearing vulnerable. Over time, these suppressed feelings build up, and they may manifest in small, unconscious ways. They may start to resent others who don't appreciate their efforts, or they may feel angered when their sacrifices go unnoticed. This frustration might lead them to criticize others harshly or to create unnecessary conflicts. In extreme cases, this pattern could destroy relationships, as the person who once prided themselves on their goodness may now appear controlling, passive-aggressive, or even downright cruel. This is the paradox of the shadow. The more we try to hide it, the more we give it control. We spend so much time trying to maintain a perfect image of ourselves that we forget to examine the darker parts of our psyche that are working against us. These suppressed feelings do not remain dormant. They seek expression, and if we do not allow them to be consciously acknowledged, they will manifest in ways that can be destructive. By repressing aspects of ourselves, especially those that we deem to be shameful or socially unacceptable, we fail to live fully. Jung believed that this denial of the shadow leads to psychological fragmentation, which results in emotional pain, confusion, and feelings of disconnection. The question then arises, why is it so difficult to face our shadow? Jung believed that this difficulty lies in the ego's need to maintain a consistent, positive self-image. Our egos, the conscious aspects of ourselves, construct an idealized version of who we think we are and how we wish to be seen by others. Confronting the shadow threatens this fragile identity as it exposes the contradictions, imperfections, and flaws we would rather not acknowledge. To face the shadow requires us to relinquish the false sense of control we have over our identity and accept the reality that we are far from perfect. The shadow represents all those aspects of ourselves that we have deemed unacceptable, and it forces us to confront the painful truth that we are not entirely in control of who we are. But why is this confrontation so important? Why should we care about facing the parts of ourselves that we find so uncomfortable? The answer lies in the fact that the shadow, though often perceived as a negative force, holds within it great potential for transformation. Jung proposed that rather than attempting to destroy or suppress the shadow, we should learn to integrate it into our conscious self. Integration does not mean accepting every negative impulse or acting on every repressed desire, but rather acknowledging them and learning from them. By understanding the shadow, we can unlock power, creativity, and authenticity that we would otherwise never access. The integration of the shadow is an essential step on the journey toward becoming a whole and authentic individual. Consider the example of someone who is often afraid of rejection. This fear may stem from a deep-seated insecurity that they are not good enough. Rather than confronting this fear, they may seek to suppress it by building an image of themselves as perfect, constantly striving to meet other people's expectations. However, this constant quest for perfection is exhausting and unsustainable. The fear of rejection remains, lurking in the shadows, and it leads to self-sabotage. The person may avoid putting themselves in situations where they could face rejection, or they may withdraw emotionally from relationships, fearing that they will eventually be hurt. But if this person were to confront their fear, if they were to acknowledge the shadow of insecurity and self-doubt, they could begin to heal. Instead of hiding from rejection, they could learn to accept it as a natural part of life and understand that their worth is not defined by others' opinions. Another key point that Jung made about the shadow is that it is not only a source of personal conflict, but can also become a projection onto others. When we fail to acknowledge our own darker traits, we project them onto the world around us. This projection leads us to see the flaws in others more readily than we see them in ourselves. For instance, someone who is deeply envious might constantly accuse others of being jealous, while someone who is secretly angry might accuse others of being hostile. This projection distorts our view of the world and prevents us from having honest, self-reflective relationships. The more we deny the shadow, the more likely we are to see it in others. And this projection can lead to unnecessary conflicts and misunderstandings. In relationships, the shadow can have a particularly powerful influence. When we are unaware of the shadow within us, we may attract people who reflect our unacknowledged traits. For example, someone who represses their anger might be drawn to a partner who expresses their anger in unhealthy ways. The shadow is not only a personal issue. It is a force that shapes how we interact with others. If we do not recognize it, we may find ourselves caught in destructive patterns of behavior that seem beyond our control. The process of confronting the shadow is difficult, but it is also deeply rewarding. It is an essential step in individuation, the process through which we become fully aware and integrated individuals. Individuation involves recognizing the various aspects of the self, both light and dark, and integrating them into a cohesive whole. By facing our shadow, we accept our humanity and become more whole as individuals. Jung believed that the process of individuation is the path to true freedom, as it allows us to transcend the limitations imposed by the ego and live more authentically. The key to confronting the shadow lies in self-awareness and self-compassion. When we become aware of our darker traits, whether it's our jealousy, our need for validation, or our tendency to manipulate situations, we can begin to take responsibility for them. Rather than running from these parts of ourselves, we can learn to accept them as part of our nature. The shadow does not need to define us. It is simply a part of who we are. By facing it with compassion and understanding, we can transform it from a source of shame and conflict into a source of power and growth. In conclusion, Carl Jung's concept of the shadow invites us to confront the parts of ourselves we most fear and deny. The more we suppress the shadow, the more it controls us. The more we face it, the more we can integrate it and use its energy for personal growth. The journey of self-awareness is not an easy one, but is the only path to true freedom and authenticity. To live fully, we must embrace the darkness within, and in doing so, we unlock the potential for transformation and self-empowerment. Individuation, according to Carl Jung, is the process of becoming the person you are always meant to be, your most authentic self. It is a lifelong journey of self-discovery, self-acceptance, and integration. But perhaps more than anything, it is a process of transformation, a rebirth, in which parts of yourself must die to allow for the creation of a more whole, free, and empowered version of you. In Jung's view, individuation is not merely an intellectual understanding or a self-help technique, but rather a deep psychological and spiritual process that involves confronting the complexities of the self, integrating the repressed and hidden parts of our psyche, and embracing both our strengths and weaknesses. The central idea behind individuation is that it is the process of becoming whole, of integrating all aspects of the personality, both light and dark. This is not a superficial journey where one simply adopts new behaviors or habits. It is a transformative journey that requires deep introspection and, at times, significant internal upheaval. At its core, individuation involves facing the unconscious aspects of the self, those parts that we have denied, repressed, or simply refused to accept. By confronting these shadow aspects, we bring them into conscious awareness, integrate them into our daily lives, and achieve a sense of balance and self-actualization. The road to individuation is not an easy one. It often requires a complete reorientation of how we view ourselves and our place in the world. Jung argued that most people live in what he called a persona, a false self that they present to the world in order to meet social expectations, family demands, and personal ambitions. The persona is a protective mask, a role we play that hides our true nature from others and even from ourselves. While the persona is necessary for functioning in society, it can become a trap, keeping us disconnected from who we truly are. This disconnect is one of the key barriers to individuation. We are so busy playing roles and meeting expectations that we lose sight of our true selves. For example, imagine someone who has spent their entire life meeting the expectations of their family and society. From a young age, they were told that success meant becoming a doctor or a lawyer. So they pursued this path without ever truly considering what they wanted. They became skilled at performing in this role, excelled in school, went to medical school, became a respected doctor, yet when they look in the mirror, they feel empty. They question, is this really me? This individual has become so entrenched in the persona that they have lost touch with their true desires and passions. The persona has served its purpose, but now it is time to confront the real self beneath it. Individuation requires us to let go of these false selves, these masks that we wear in order to fit into the world around us. It means breaking free from the constraints of what others think we should be and embracing the raw, unfiltered essence of who we are. It is about giving up the need for external validation and living in alignment with our own inner truth. This process can be painful, as it often involves letting go of long-held beliefs, societal norms, and familial expectations. But it is also incredibly liberating. The more we strip away the false versions of ourselves, the more we begin to connect with our true nature. Consider a person who has always prided themselves on being a people pleaser. They go out of their way to make others happy, often sacrificing their own needs and desires in the process. This behavior has been ingrained in them since childhood, perhaps because they were praised for being good and selfless. Over time, however, this pattern has led to resentment, burnout, and a sense of emptiness. To begin the process of individuation, this person must confront their people-pleasing tendencies and ask themselves, why do they feel the need to constantly seek approval from others? What would happen if they started setting boundaries, speaking up for themselves, and living in alignment with their own needs? For this person, individuation would involve confronting the deep-seated belief that they must always put others before themselves and embracing the idea that it is okay to prioritize their own happiness and well-being. But individuation is not just about shedding the persona. It is also about integrating the shadow, the repressed, denied, or unconscious parts of the self that we have not acknowledged. The shadow is made up of qualities that we find unacceptable or bad, but these traits are often deeply ingrained in us, and when left unchecked, they can negatively affect our behavior. For example, a person who is excessively nice may repress their anger, choosing not to express their frustrations in healthy ways. Over time, this unexpressed anger can build up and manifest as passive-aggressive behavior, irritability, or even physical health problems. The individuation process requires this person to confront their anger, acknowledge it as a valid emotion, and learn how to express it constructively. Through this process, the person learns to accept and integrate the shadow rather than trying to suppress it. In doing so, they become more authentic, more whole. Jung believed that the shadow contains not only our negative qualities, but also the raw energy and potential for growth. When we learn to accept the shadow, we can harness its power and use it to fuel our personal transformation. This process is not about eliminating the shadow, but about making it a conscious part of our lives, integrating it into our sense of self. The process of individuation also involves engaging with the anima and animus, the inner feminine and masculine aspects that exist within each of us. According to Jung, both men and women have both masculine and feminine energies, and it is crucial for us to integrate these energies in order to achieve balance. The anima represents the feminine qualities within a man, while the animus represents the masculine qualities within a woman. Jung argued that if we fail to integrate these aspects of ourselves, we are more likely to project them onto others, leading to unhealthy dynamics in relationships. For example, a man who has not integrated his anima may have difficulty relating to women, seeing them as objects of desire or projecting his fantasies onto them. Similarly, a woman who has not integrated her animus may struggle with embracing her assertiveness or strength, preferring to remain passive and dependent. Individuation requires us to confront and integrate these inner energies so that we can become more whole and balanced individuals. This may involve confronting gender stereotypes and societal expectations about what it means to be masculine or feminine. By embracing both the anima and animus, we can transcend these limitations and become more authentic in our interactions with others. Individuation also involves a deep engagement with archetypes, which are universal patterns that shape our behavior, thoughts, and emotions. Jung identified several core archetypes, including the hero, the wise old man, the shadow, the anima/animus, and the self. These archetypes are not just abstract concepts, they are living symbols that influence our psyche on a deep, unconscious level. For example, the hero's journey is a common archetype that is present in myths, stories, and even personal experiences. It represents the process of transformation, of overcoming obstacles, and of becoming something greater than we were before. By recognizing and engaging with these archetypes, we can better understand our own personal narratives and unlock the potential for growth and transformation. Finally, individuation is not a linear process. It is not something that can be completed once and for all. Instead, it is an ongoing journey, a continual process of self-discovery and integration. Jung believed that individuation is not a destination, but rather a dynamic and evolving process that takes place throughout our lives. As we confront new challenges, experience new relationships, and navigate different phases of life, we continue to peel back the layers of our psyche and integrate new aspects of ourselves. This ongoing process is what makes us fully human. It is the journey toward becoming the person we are meant to be. Individuation is at its core the journey of becoming who we are truly meant to be, free from the constraints of social expectations, familial demands, and personal insecurities. It is about stripping away the false selves we have created to survive in the world and embracing the fullness of who we are, both light and dark. It is about transforming our wounds into sources of strength and learning to live authentically. While the process may be challenging and painful, it is also deeply liberating. By confronting the shadow, integrating the anima and animus, and embracing the archetypes, we can become whole, balanced, and fully realized individuals, living with purpose and authenticity. Looking back on the journey we've taken through the exploration of Carl Jung's psychological theories, it's clear that we have uncovered an essential truth about the human experience: the importance of confronting our shadow and undergoing the process of individuation. These two concepts are deeply intertwined and represent critical milestones in the path to self-realization. Jung's work calls us to look inward, to face parts of ourselves we often avoid or reject, and to integrate those aspects into our conscious being. The journey of individuation is not for the faint of heart, but it is a necessary one for those who wish to live fully, authentically, and freely. Individuation, as we've discussed, is the process of integrating all aspects of the self, the light and the dark, the known and the unknown. This is not a simple task. It requires the courage to confront the parts of ourselves that are often uncomfortable, even frightening, but is precisely this act of courage that leads to personal transformation. The shadow is not just a collection of negative traits or undesirable qualities. It is a vital part of who we are. It contains the repressed emotions, the hidden desires, and the unacknowledged aspects of our psyche. Ignoring the shadow or pretending it doesn't exist is like trying to live with one hand tied behind our backs, disconnected from a vital source of power that lies within us. The shadow represents the parts of ourselves that society, our families, or our own egos have deemed unacceptable. These are the emotions we've been taught to suppress: anger, jealousy, envy, fear, and others. It's easy to think of these emotions as negative or harmful, and we're often taught to hide them. But Jung's central insight is that the shadow is not something to be eliminated or eradicated. It is something to be integrated. When we fail to confront the shadow, it doesn't disappear. Instead, it manifests in our lives in ways we don't fully understand. It shows up in our relationships, in our reactions, and in the choices we make, often in subtle, unconscious ways. Think of a person who is constantly trying to please others, perhaps out of a fear of rejection or a need for approval. This person may go out of their way to avoid conflict, to meet everyone's expectations, and to maintain a perfectly curated image of themselves. On the surface, they may appear selfless and generous, but beneath that facade lies a deep well of unacknowledged resentment or selfishness. These repressed feelings can only remain hidden for so long before they begin to bubble up, often in the form of passive-aggressive behavior, irritability, or even physical symptoms of stress. The more this person represses their shadow, the anger, frustration, and unmet needs, the more it controls them without their awareness. The path to individuation for this individual would require them to confront their repressed anger, to acknowledge their needs and desires, and to stop living for the approval of others. The journey of individuation demands that we face these uncomfortable truths about ourselves. It requires a deep introspection, a willingness to look at the parts of our personalities that we often hide from others, and sometimes even from ourselves. But in facing these truths, we begin to regain power over our lives. By confronting the shadow, we unlock the energy and potential that have been trapped in the unconscious. It is in this confrontation that we find the strength to transcend our limitations, to break free from old patterns, and to live authentically. A powerful story that illustrates the process of confronting the shadow and finding freedom comes from the life of someone who experienced a spiritual crisis. Let's imagine a man in his early 40s. Seemingly successful, he had a stable job, a loving family, and a good circle of friends. Yet, inside, he felt lost. His life, while appearing outwardly perfect, was marked by a deep sense of emptiness. He was struggling with anxiety, depression, and a constant feeling that something was missing. He spent years suppressing his emotions, pushing down his fears and anger in an attempt to maintain his perfect facade. He tried to be the perfect husband, father, and professional. But the pressure of maintaining this mask was slowly wearing him down. After a particularly difficult year, marked by personal loss and an increasing sense of disillusionment, he found himself at a breaking point. One day, he finally acknowledged that he had been avoiding his own emotions, running from the parts of himself that he found unacceptable. This realization did not come easily, but it was the turning point he needed. He began to explore his shadow, confronting the emotions he had been repressing for years. He discovered anger, selfishness, and fear that had been festering inside him. As he faced these uncomfortable feelings, he also found compassion, strength, and courage, qualities that had been buried beneath the surface. By engaging with his shadow, this man began to heal. He learned that true strength comes from acknowledging one's vulnerabilities, and true freedom comes from accepting oneself fully, both the good and the bad. As he integrated these shadow aspects, he found himself living more authentically. His relationships improved because he was no longer hiding behind a false persona. He started setting boundaries and asserting his own needs, no longer afraid of disappointing others. He began to embrace life in a deeper, more meaningful way, knowing that he was no longer at war with himself. This story demonstrates the profound shift that happens when we confront our shadow and begin the process of individuation. It shows that the path to wholeness and freedom often requires us to face our darkest fears and most uncomfortable emotions. It's not an easy journey, but it is one that leads to personal empowerment and peace. Just as this man discovered his true self through confronting his shadow, so can we all. The process of individuation is not about achieving perfection. It's about embracing our imperfections, learning from them, and becoming more fully ourselves in the process. As we reflect on the journey of individuation, it is important to understand that it is not a one-time event, but a lifelong process. The ego will constantly seek to return to its old ways, to cling to old identities and masks. But individuation requires a continual self-reflection and self-awareness. It is about constantly growing, evolving, and integrating new aspects of the self. There will be moments of doubt, fear, and struggle, but these are not obstacles to be avoided. They are opportunities for further growth and integration. The call to action, then, is clear. Begin today. Take the first step toward individuation by confronting the shadow within. Look at the parts of yourself that you have avoided or rejected. Acknowledge your weaknesses, accept your flaws, and recognize that these aspects of yourself are not weaknesses at all, but potential sources of growth and transformation. Understand that facing your shadow is not a sign of weakness, but of strength. It takes courage to confront the parts of ourselves that we fear, but in doing so, we free ourselves from the limitations that have been imposed by the unconscious mind. Let this be a call to self-awareness, a call to embrace the wholeness of who you are. Stop running from your fears and start integrating them into your life. Recognize that the process of individuation is not about perfection, but about authenticity and transformation. It is about becoming whole, about living a life that is true to who you are, not to who you think you should be. To those reading this, I encourage you to take action now. You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to be perfect. What matters is that you begin the journey. By facing your shadow, you will find a strength you didn't know you had. You will uncover parts of yourself that were hidden, and in doing so, you will unlock the power to create the life you were always meant to live. Embrace this process of individuation and step into your authentic self today. As we wrap up this exploration of Carl Jung's theory of the shadow and individuation, I hope you're starting to see the profound impact this journey can have on your life. We all live in a world that constantly asks us to conform, to fit into a box, to wear a mask that pleases others. But what if true freedom comes from stepping away from these external expectations and learning to embrace our authentic self-shadow and all? The journey of individuation is a path of transformation. It requires confronting those aspects of yourself you've hidden or denied. It demands the courage to face your deepest fears, to integrate the parts of yourself you've been avoiding, and ultimately to let go of the false identities you've been holding on to. But the reward for this is freedom, the freedom to live fully, to act authentically, and to embrace every part of your being without shame. If you've ever felt like something was missing, like you've been stuck in a loop of repetition, or like you've never truly understood who you are, then individuation is the key to breaking free. This process isn't easy, but it is the only way to unlock your true potential. Now, before you go, I want to remind you once again to like, share, and subscribe if you found this video helpful. And if this content resonates with you and you want to support the channel, consider donating through the Super Thanks option. Your generosity allows me to continue bringing these deep, transformative ideas to you and to others who may be on a similar path of self-discovery. Remember, true transformation begins when you face the shadow. Don't be afraid to step into the darkness. By doing so, you'll discover strengths you never knew existed, and you'll ultimately be able to step into the light of your true, authentic self. Thanks for being here with me on this journey. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Stay true, stay bold, and embrace your journey of transformation.